Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. And before we get to this week's guest, I want to remind you to subscribe, to share the channel, to comment on the videos, especially the videos that will potentially resonate with your family and friends. This week's guest is Gina Schmidt. Welcome to the show, Gina. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gina, I want to start this episode a little bit differently than others in that I have a sense that a lot of the viewers desire to know about different people's prayer life. So could you tell me what your prayer life looks like, what devotionals you rely on, things like that?
Yes, I can. I am a secular discalced Carmelite, and we have some things that we are expected to do as secular Carmelites. And so I have those things, and then I can share. So I'll share a little bit of that as well. So, one thing that we are asked to do on a daily basis is morning and evening prayer using the liturgy of the hours, the same prayers that the priests and the sisters and the deacons all over the world are using. So we're asked to do that. So I've been doing that for many years now, more than 10 years. And my husband does that with me in the evenings, which is such a blessing. Um, and then on my own, I am asked to do at least 30 minutes of quiet meditation time with God. Um, Christian meditation sometimes I think sometimes people are confused with the term meditation and they wonder what that looks like. And what it looks like for a Carmelite is to try to sit and be quiet, not only exteriorly, but interiorly, even more importantly. So that's something that is part of my day as well. I also have committed to pray for priests every day, for vocations and for current priests, seminarians, retired priests. So we have like a rosary circle, if anyone is familiar with those, where I have 1 decade that's been assigned to me. It's been several years now too. And it's the same decade every day, but it's one that's very dear to me, which will probably come out later.
Oh,
And so every night I do that decade for priests.
that's
And then once
beautiful.
a week, and then once a week I go to, I have a holy hour that is mine, that I go to. And it's perfectly set right in the middle of the week, kind of when you need that extra boost.
Absolutely. So I do want to ask you about the rosary component.
Yeah,
I had not heard that. So is it focused on a specific mystery within a specific set? Like in other words, is it like the scourging at the pillar? Is it the Annunciation?
exactly.
Okay.
So a rosary circle,
Hmm.
and is when a group of people take the entire rosary, so 20 decades,
Hmm.
right? Five mysteries and the four, right? So 20 people at least sign up, and each person takes one mystery, and they are committed to pray that on whatever the agreement is. For us, it's daily. So daily, I pray the Assumption of Mary is my mystery that I pray every day for priests.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So for those that are listening, Gina is a revert like me and many others that have been interviewed. Gina, can you take us to childhood or wherever the cradle? It's weird. I'll say I am a cradle Catholic. I mean, I was raised Catholic, and then in my story, I kind of ended up in a Protestant denomination. The good thing is I don't know all the details of your story. I like
Right.
it that way. So if you can take us back to where you think it's relevant, that would be amazing.
Mhm. Yeah. So I grew up in a home with my mom and my dad and my grandfather, my father's father, and he was the major faith influence in my life growing up. Um, I don't remember a time that he wasn't there until we lost him. And so he really was the one that raised me in the faith. I actually remember my baptism. So that tells you I wasn't a baby. I was, I think, 4 years old when I was baptized in the local church, and my grandfather was the one that took me to mass every Sunday. And so everything I learned from him. My father did talk about prayer and did talk about God. My mother was not Catholic at the time and loved Catholicism. I am a second marriage baby, so there were some complicated issues there for them as far as having their marriage blessed, which I
Sure.
found out way later, way later. Didn't know it at the time. I just was like, why doesn't dad ever go to church, right? Um, but grandpa was steadfast in taking me, and I used to love to go into his room and look at the pictures on the wall and open his desk drawer and look at his rosary and just all those little things about him. So he made sure that I had a Catholic upbringing. It was his doing, and he actually was my godfather as well as my grandfather.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, even if you don't have parents that are there, I've heard a number of stories where a grandparent steps in and has that influence, even if they don't live in the house, of course, just having that
Yes.
person that's dedicated to the faith, and what an influence, what a witness it is, clearly, for a child. So, um,
Yeah. So I was baptized at 4. And my parents put me into Catholic school at that same church that was down the road. They had a school. I went to Catholic school from first grade all the way through eighth grade, but not all at the same one. We moved quite a few times in there. But I spent my first 5 or 6 years, 5 years of schooling at the same Catholic school. So, so that
did
was
you
good.
did you feel during that period of time that your faith was steady? Do you have any?
So,
Yeah,
yes, I was
yeah,
little, of course.
sure.
I have those pictures of it was the 70s, I have to tell you. So, I have those pictures of me in my interesting little, communion dress and all of that. But yeah, I loved going to church with my grandfather. But I think there still was that part of kind of just still a confusion about why it was mostly just me and him going.
Hmm.
Sometimes my mom would come. I always wondered why, because my dad would always tell you he was Catholic, always. But I always wondered, why doesn't he receive communion? Why doesn't he go to church with us? Those sorts of things. So it's a little bit of a confusion there.
So, how long were you going to mass with him? Was that all the way
Um,
through high school into college, or when did that shift to, I guess, where it was your experience by yourself or with
yeah.
others?
Yeah, we moved several times from when I was in sixth grade up into high school. And we didn't settle somewhere again until I was about 10th grade. So there was a lot of change. I went to, um, I think, a total of 3 Catholic elementary schools, up through eighth grade. And then my parents put me in a public high school. And I do think things kind of changed that year. But at first, they were going quite well. My mother had actually started an RCIA program, and she was she loved the Catholic faith. She actually comes from a Jewish background,
Wow.
and so yes, yes, and just wonderful. But um, she it ended up that we moved at the end of, like, right at a pivotal point where she didn't get to complete everything that she needed to complete. So even after all that, and I actually went with her to the classes, she was not able to be received into the church. And then she didn't pick that up again when we moved. Then in 1987, my grandfather passed away rather suddenly. And so going to church kind of stopped at the same time. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So 10th grade, I'm sorry, I lost track. Was that in 10th grade, or was that?
Oh gosh. It was either 10th or 11th when he passed away. The beginning of right at the beginning of the school year. It was September. It was like, oh, the timing was not great either. But yeah, so I didn't have a car. I didn't have a way to get myself to church. I was still kind of young for all that, and my parents didn't go. So things really started to change at that time.
Um, so you would transition to a public school.
Hmm.
You're not going to church. So you had what did you have moments of darkness during? Because I ask that because the number of people, not necessarily on this show, but the number of people in those years that have some really, I guess, depressing moments when they're trying to figure out why they're here. I can't put that into your story, but I'm just
Hmm.
wondering if there's any of that, or what is that when you talk about a pivot or a change,
Yeah.
what does that
Um,
look like?
I don't know if I don't remember many dark moments. I
Good.
was a pretty positive kid. I didn't stop saying I was Catholic, just like my dad. Yes, I'm Catholic. Right, just not going to church. Um, and so what happened was in my senior year, so I would still pray some, but really I was busy working and going to school and having a boyfriend and doing all those things so that my world was full of the worldly stuff. And so there wasn't a whole lot of room in there for God. And my senior year, I knew one steadfast, wonderful Catholic young man who was a friend of mine, and then I also in our group of nerdy people were some really wonderful Protestants too, and also another young lady about my age who was Catholic but was searching into other churches. She had been invited into other churches. And somehow I ended up connected with that group of people. And that's where a pivot happens for me, where I'm wanting to know God. I don't feel like I'm equipped at this point with my elementary school education
Sure.
of
Yeah.
Catholicism. And they take me to their youth group and I meet their youth leader and learn about their faith. And he asks me questions about mine that I can't answer because even though I went to Catholic school, it was the
Yep.
70s and early 80s. And I, I, I don't think I could answer him. And when I wasn't able to answer him, I felt like, well, maybe there isn't a good answer. Right? Maybe I was wrong about this and maybe God's over here. And so that's kind of what happened was I kind of went with them to a few events and including some big ones,
Like youth
those big
conferences?
events say that no, it was more like a rally almost,
Okay.
where you're kind of the emotions get worked up, your spirituality gets worked up. They do an altar call, and lo and behold, I'm walking down into an altar
Yep.
and becoming a born again Christian
Wow.
in my senior year of high school.
Wow. Do you
Yeah.
remember so I don't know if you can go back to remember specifically when that all started, did you say, "Well, this feels a little weird?" Because again, going to mass every week with your grandpa and then that for me, because I had a very similar experience, it took a while. I just
Oh,
felt so
yes.
odd, much like a Protestant going to a Catholic mass for the first time, like, "What's going on here?" So, yeah, what was that
Yes.
like? Yeah, growing up?
Yeah. Um, I it's hard to explain. It's almost surreal when you're there. I mean, there were thousands of people at this event. I lived outside of a very large city, and it was a very large church where this was occurring, and it was almost surreal. And I went home and I told my dad, I'm like, guess what, Dad? I received Jesus into my life and I'm a born again Christian. And he's like, oh. Okay, that's really nice. And I give them so much credit. I do, because he didn't get mad. He he didn't ignore. He just continually loved me. And I understand so much more now what he must have been feeling at the time. But at that moment, I was like, I think I'm on the right path, right? I've made this change with a desire to know Jesus better than I ever had before. That was my desire.
Wow. So after you announced the born again Christianity, did you immediately start attending the church that you were kind of affiliated with, or was it?
No, and it wasn't even so the rally that was at that church wasn't even the church that these kids belonged to. It was one of those come one, come all to
Sure.
this really cool
Yep.
event,
Yep.
kind of a non-denominational thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And I started to go to the meetings at school for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I would meet with the friends at lunchtime and we would do Bible studies together. One of them gifted me an NIV Bible. Um, and so it was kind of a Jesus and me time, to be honest. And I don't remember, I didn't even start going to church on a regular basis. But I was reading, I was fellowshipping with them at different events and things, but I don't feel like I had a clear path even at that time.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned just having getting that Bible as a gift. I do remember in the early days of, I don't know, attending a Protestant church that I'd spend a lot of time in the Bible in specific books and underlining a lot. And there is value in that. There's no question about it. But it was very, for me, it was isolated to just a few books within the New Testament because I was so lost otherwise. Anyway, that's the kind of a tangent. So, what was did that allow you to just get closer and closer to God? Did you feel like things were really, I guess, opening up for you, improving in your relationship to God by having the Bible open? I'm assuming on a regular basis, because you just said it was you and Jesus. And
Mm.
how did that
Mhm.
edify you? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I felt like I was learning about him more than I had before. Um, I don't remember. Actually, I do remember we had one of those big Catholic family Bibles when I was little. And I used to love to open that book, that giant book on the floor and just look at all the pictures.
Yes.
So I knew all the basic stories because I went to mass every Sunday, right? So I knew all of those things. But you're right about focusing on certain books because Romans became very important, right? And a few others, and
Yep.
many of them were in the background. um, and I do, what I felt at that time was I felt like I was doing a lot of work, trying to get closer to God. But also, I was learning how to pray. Is extemporaneously the right word? I don't know, but without just on our fathers and Hail
Yeah.
Marys and things. I was learning how to pray by talking to God. So I do think that some of the wonderful takeaways I have from that whole time was learning how to pray that way and feeling a way more comfortable in a Bible and navigating through one and learning how to do that.
Yeah. That's what you're saying is exactly my experience as well, because I guess it's the rote prayer that you, I don't know, it's if you say it mindlessly, then it just becomes this habit. But if you can slow down, it really is beautiful. But aside from that, I couldn't do that. I would always say it mindlessly, all the rote prayers. I didn't realize what I was doing. And
Mhm.
then attending some of the Protestant services and observing people, in hindsight, I may not have agreed with everything that they were saying, but what they were doing was they were trying their best to open their hearts
Mhm.
to God. And so that really stuck with me, and it has helped me tremendously. Um, I had another question for you during about that period of time. Oh, did you feel during that period that something was missing? Not whether that's the Eucharist or just something like I'm missing grace or I need to return, or was there any feeling that you had like a void somewhere?
So the Eucharist, I didn't have, of course, a good understanding at that time of the Eucharist. Looking back, I can see moments where I was like, there he was, and there he was, and there he was. But at the time, um, I genuinely thought I was doing God's will in my life. I really did. What the pang I had was knowing that it wasn't what my parents would have wanted for me. That was really probably the main thing was I know this doesn't make them that like happy. And I also hadn't like written off Catholicism. I guess I just didn't realize the gap that there was. I didn't see it. I
You're
didn't write it
saying
off. I
you're
didn't write
saying
it off.
you're saying my story. This is crazy. Yeah,
Stealing it
that's
now.
what I said. Yeah, you don't write it off, but you don't recognize the difference, or maybe you just
No.
feel that it's a spectrum, and
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Sorry for
So,
interjecting. Go
so
ahead.
let me tell you where it goes from here.
Yeah.
So, it goes, I graduate, and 2 weeks after graduation, I am in Army basic training. Okay. I joined the Army. I knew I was going to be in the military since I was ninth grade. I always wanted to serve. Um, so I was in Army basic training, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life up to that point, and a little past that. Very hard. I was a very small child, 99 pounds, and I was not built for being a soldier. But one thing they did at that time was they gave each of us the little Army green Psalms, Proverbs, New Testament little pocket Bible. So anyone that wanted them could have them. So they gave all of us those. And I will tell you that uh, if I wasn't looking for God enough before, I was definitely looking for him now. And he was sustaining me, certainly. Not with the Eucharist, because I wasn't going to Catholic services. I was going to the Protestant service, right?
Yep.
On Sundays. But every single night I was opening that little green Bible and reading Proverbs and Psalms and the New Testament and just poring over them before bed. And it also had beautiful hymns in it too. Those hymns that you would look for, how great thou art, things like
Sure.
that. And I would look at that constantly. And actually, that's when my faith really started to grow, was when I went off to the Army.
And how long was that period?
I was in the Army for 3 years.
Okay.
And during that time, I met my first husband. And that was a whole crazy spiritual experience because he was a returned Mormon missionary. And but was he was disenchanted with that faith.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, I was raised Catholic and I'm, not really doing that anymore. Let's be Protestant together. Right. And so that was our big, wonderful plan, this 18-year-old and this 21-year-old. And so, but what God had some interesting plans, and he sees the long game, right? We don't see the long game, he does. And I met my very best friend in the world in the Army just a few months after basic, and she's a Catholic girl. She was basically country mouse and city mouse, we'd call ourselves. She was country mouse, I was city mouse. And we were just, two peas in a pod. And she was very much a practicing Catholic. And so she asked me to go to church with her. And again, I haven't written them off yet. I haven't written off the Catholic Church. And so I said, "Yeah, I'll go with you. Let's go check out the local Catholic church." And I went to a few services with her. It wasn't on our army post. It was in the town. And I felt like I wanted to try to go back. And so I'm like, "Well, I need to go to reconciliation. It's been a long time and all this stuff." So this was, of course, before I wasn't married or anything. This was early.
Hmm.
Um, and something happened in that reconciliation that really it tore me from the church for a long time. What happened was I got there kind of close to when the service should have been, the reconciliation time was ending.
Hmm.
And as I sat and tried to talk with this priest, he was rolling his eyes and he was checking his watch. And I felt very dismissed and very unimportant. And I have to be honest with you and say that was the last time I really made an effort to be Catholic for a very long time after that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, so you were 20, still early
I
20s
was
around there?
18 years
Oh,
old.
you were 18. Yeah, okay. This is
Yeah.
the beginning
I was
of
just
the
after high
army.
school.
Yeah.
Right.
Unbelievable. Okay,
Yeah.
so did you go back, I'm assuming, and share that with a number of people, or did you keep that to yourself?
I think I told her, my
Yeah,
my friend, and she's still my best friend, by the way.
that's awesome.
I told her, and I told my boyfriend at the time, who became my husband. I told him, and I said, "Let's just find another way to worship," And so we did end up getting married. We had a civil marriage, and we would go to church together. And this began, like, I guess, even more committed a Protestant life
Hmm.
of trying to find my place. And because we were military, we moved a lot. And so um, every time we moved, I had to find a new church to go to.
Yeah.
And that was almost a job in a way, because everybody has a statement of faith. You go and you kind of try them out, right? You try out some different churches and you find out, well, do they believe what I believe? Because what I believe is the right thing.
Hmm.
And does their statement of faith say that? Because if it doesn't, then I don't know if I can go there, right? And so this was kind of how my life went for a few years.
Just,
And we did find some good churches. We
yeah,
found some not so good churches.
yeah.
But that was kind of how things went for a while. And so whenever we'd move, especially when I got out of the military and we started to have children and he stayed in, I would try to find us a place to go to church. And he wasn't terribly invested in it, but he was making an effort.
Now, I'm always curious about this. Was there a common denomination when you were going looking for a church, or you were just saying, let's just investigate
I
around
think
here in the vicinity?
yeah, I typically focused on non-denominational.
Sure.
Um, I I had gone to a Lutheran service when I was in high school, and I thought, oh, this is kind of like a little bit like a Catholic service,
Yeah,
but it was a kind of an odd feeling, and I wasn't necessarily comfortable there.
sure.
So I would tend to go more towards a non-denominational church.
Got it. Okay.
I did end up going to a Church of Christ in one of the places where we lived. And I also ended up going to a Southern Baptist church for
Wow.
a while. And those were very interesting experiences.
Yeah, so you had your faith intact. It was just you were moving so often. It's
Hmm.
just finding the right or doing your best work to find a community and get plugged in, as they say, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was really hard. It
yeah.
was hard.
Um, so what happened? What was the next phase after that?
Well, I think the next phase was when we got out of the military. This was my first husband and me. We got out of the military and went back to Florida, where I was born and raised, and went to college. And our marriage started to really suffer. Um, we didn't get as fully invested as we would have before.
Sure.
And I had my second child and had nursing school, so very busy. And soon after I graduated, my husband, I found out he had another person in his life, and we divorced a year later. And that was probably, if you're looking for the dark time, that was the dark
That was the
time.
dark time. So,
Yeah.
so you said that you'd had the second child, so that child was only a year old when this all happened. Yep.
Probably, let's see, had my second child, started nursing school. So she was about 2.5 or
Oh, okay.
3
Got it.
when, yeah, I graduated, and then he told me about her. And so we ended up getting divorced a year later. And when that happened, I tried to make it for a year as a new nurse with 2 little children. And yeah, it wasn't easy. So my father, bless him, he's like, come home, come home, come home, come home. Right. He's such a good dad. And so I did. I went home, stayed with him for a while till I could buy my own house, which I did. It was a block away, kind of the way you want it if you're wanting grandparent involvement. And so that was a good situation for living. It was a terrible spiritual situation. I was very mad at God at that point. Very mad.
Do you remember, um, first of all, thank you for sharing that. How long would you say you were mad at God? And do you remember speaking about that or just being silent, but internally you're mad? Like, in
Oh,
other
I
words,
would yell at him.
yeah,
Yeah, I would, but for the most part, I thought, I don't even think you care, right? So I bought my own home. I want to say that was probably 99. And so probably for the next year or a little bit longer, I really didn't want much to do with them at all. Took probably about a year of like, you know what? If you don't want to help me, I'm out kind of a thing. But I really wasn't. But I was very, very hurt.
yeah, yeah. You were venting through
I was.
all of that and grieving, obviously.
Yes.
Um, okay. So then after that period,
Hmm.
did you, I'm assuming it was kind of a transition back into some type of faith walk. I don't know that you flip a switch on and all of a sudden everything's hunky dory. Do you
Yeah.
remember? Was it like that?
No, my kids were what, about 3 and 5 or so, and I decided I was worried about them and wanting them to have a religious upbringing,
Yeah.
a knowledge of God. I was worried about them. Their dad had, was gone. He literally moved across the country, literally. So I'm like, these kids need something. They need something. So we did start going to a church. And I don't even remember what church it was, but I think it was probably a non-denominational church.
Sure.
Um, and it was a comfortable place. I just did not feel a spark or anything like that. But I was happy to be bringing them someplace where they were learning about God.
Yep. That
And
makes
so that's kind of what we did for a little while.
okay. Yeah, kind of rebuilding some sort of
Yes.
foundation. Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
So did they take to it? I mean, obviously they were very young, but do you remember? I
They
don't,
were okay with it. I
yeah,
think my son was, what, 5 or 6. He was a little confused, I think, but he had such a sweet little spirit when he was little, and he would see God in the rainbows and things like that. And so just, I think they did. I think they did enjoy going.
Yeah, I mentioned that because there was a period of time where my wife and I, as I mentioned, we were going to a non-denominational church, and we would drop them off at the daycare that was part of the church and just
Yep.
go into the service. And so there's no talk about what was happening in the service. It was, hey, what did you guys do?
Yes.
I'm not going to critique what they did. They did some good things, but it
Hmm.
was, but then when we returned, when I reverted and we're in mass with all the kids and as
Yes.
chaotic as it is,
Hmm.
they will talk about what happened in the mass and not necessarily some character they saw on a TV screen to keep them
Right.
occupied. So it's just an interesting
It's a very
shift
different dynamic.
between the two. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Hmm.
So how long were you all going to, do you remember how long you were going to that church before
Um,
the next stop?
so the next thing that happened was that I was divorced, and one of my friends from the Army had been a wonderful sounding board, a patient, quiet, wonderful sounding board. And that man is my husband today
Oh,
and has been for 21 years. But when we were dating, it was a little bit rough. He was a Catholic, raised Catholic, and he had I teased him about this for a long time because I we were friends way before we ever dated, right? Way before, and because we were friends in the Army, by the way. So, yeah, and he always told me he wanted to find an unmarried, never or a never divorced Catholic woman with no children. I'm like, okay, you really messed up here because I'm not Catholic. I have children and I'm divorced, right? Like you're not hitting any of your points. So, but by golly, we fell in love and had been friends already for a decade almost. I mean, for a long time. So, um, we we got together and he proposed to me, and it was during this time that we were not living in the same place, by the way. We were living across the country. And so he proposed and I said yes. But the caveat was I said, I will not become Catholic for you. I
wow.
will not. Because I didn't want to just be like, yeah, I'll,
Yeah.
take your faith, right? And I don't know if he was going steadily to church, but he would have told you he's Catholic, right?
Sure.
But he said, that's okay. You find us a church to go to, I will go with you.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's a revert as well, I guess you would say, in a sense. Not so much, a little different,
So
but
he was still going, so he would go to both sometimes, like
he,
maybe go to mass,
yeah,
go to a
he was
service.
just kind of hit and miss.
Yeah,
He was one of those, I'm going to ski on Sunday,
sure.
kind of, he was young and active. And so, yeah, but he said, I'll go wherever you want to go. We ended up, I ended up moving to Idaho and, um, meeting his family. Of course, I met his family and loved them. And I thought his mother was such a beautiful soul, that my goal was to help her to become a Christian. She was Catholic, by the way, a
Oh
devout
my
Catholic. And
gosh.
I thought she would just make the greatest Christian. She would. And so that was like a goal I had, was to help her to see that, right? Like someone helped me years ago. And it was just so interesting. And God has such a sense of humor that I ended up going to like a music thing with her, kind of just a Christian music thing. And before I could even broach the issue, she told me about this experience she had at her church where her relationship with Jesus and God grew so much. And I said, are you talking about a Catholic church? And she said, yeah. And I was perplexed and surprised and a little confused. And I said, that is really interesting. Because I'm like, wow, she seems, she seems really close to Jesus, but
Yeah.
she's a Catholic, right? So things started to change right around that time.
So the person that you were hoping or that you thought kind of like a project. I've heard that
Yeah,
too. It's like, hey, I'm gonna have to enlighten this person. They're so sweet. If only they knew
yes.
the truth. Yeah, yeah. Definitely have heard that. So she was she then continually influencing you, or that conversation kind of sparked a new investigation?
That's what happened was that it sparked a new investigation because here I am now I'm in a new state by myself with Darren with my husband and with two children, and he told me to find a church, so I'm like, okay, here I go. Let's get out there, right, and find a place. And I went to one, and it was a certain denomination, and um, I went there with my daughter, and I felt absolutely nothing, nothing, no connection, nothing. And I thought, oh, well, okay, this is so frustrating, God. Why do I have to do this every single time I move? Why do I have to go through this and from church to church? Why is it there are all these different statements of faith? Why is it also, different and complicated? And honestly, that's when I started to start looking at, okay, what are the differences? I started to look at it in an almost like in a denominational point of view and say, what are the differences between this faith and this faith and this faith and the Catholics? And the Catholics have 7 sacraments. 7. Why do they have 7 sacraments? Most of these other ones seem to have like 2 or 1 or 2 or 3 or sacraments, And so I really started, God reached me, I think he started here because this is where I was all the time, right in my head. So he started there. He's like, okay, yeah, start investigating. This is a good place for you. And I literally started taking notes and just started doing research on different denominations at that time.
Yet another parallel to my story. I mean, you can say that about a lot of reverts, but you're hitting on so many similar points. So what I remember is I started to go, I would describe it as going upstream, because in the research it would start to show that something came from some split, or some expression came from another expression. And then I'd go up a little bit. It's like, oh, they broke off from the Methodists. Okay, they broke off from the Baptists. Do you remember anything like that, or how did you?
Yes, I
Yeah.
do. I
Okay.
do. And somewhere I still have my little notebook that has all my notes trying to figure out, okay, the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Lutherans and Church of Christ and all of these things. And I still have that. And so I was trying to work my way through all of that. And I was really doing it on my own, honestly. My husband was busy working.
Sure.
I was really trying to figure this stuff out. And I had a lot of time on my own. I didn't have a whole bunch of friends yet or anything like that. And so I also found on his TV, which I hadn't had on mine, I found EWTN. And that was kind of a game changer too. And I started to watch The Journey Home on there.
Oh,
I did. And I thought, well, this is so interesting, right? Um, I wasn't so convinced of anything yet, but I was really starting to question a bunch of things. I really was. And then God, he kind of sprang, right? He's like, okay, guess what, Gina? So some different things happened. One was there was a Catholic church in our neighborhood. I would say, like, right, it was walking distance. If you took a certain path, it was walking distance. And so I kind of knew where that was. And there was also a very helpful sign that said, the church this way, right? And so I'm like, oh, okay, kind of mental note. And one night in all this searching, I felt called to just go over there to go see that church, that Catholic church over there. And I pull in, it's a Sunday night. I don't really expect I'm not sure what I was expecting. I expected it to be completely closed, I think. But I just wanted to look at it, is what it was. And I got over there and it wasn't closed. There was stuff with the youth going on. And I thought, there's stuff with the youth going on at a Catholic church on a Sunday evening. It totally surprised me. I did not expect that. And I'm like, well, the doors are open. I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab a bulletin, right? They probably have one. So I go in and I grab a bulletin and I take it home and I look it over and I'm like, they have Bible studies. This Catholic church has Bible studies. Wait, it's got, I mean, all these different things, right? That it had in there. And I was really surprised. I'm like, huh, this is just not what I remember. I don't remember this, right? And so all this is working, all of this is happening at the same time. And I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. And I haven't gone to another church yet, by the way. I tried that one and it didn't
Wait,
work out. So
say
now I'm
that
just
again.
researching.
You cut out for a second. Say that last line again.
I was just researching. I went to that one church where I said I didn't feel anything at
Got
all.
it. Yeah.
And then I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to go again until I know more. This was my plan, I think. And so I didn't go to another local Protestant church. I'm like, I need to know what I'm looking for. I think was my plan. I need to know what I'm looking for. And so that's kind of where I was. And then it couldn't have been long after, maybe a week or so, when God's like, go back to that church. It's a weekday now. Go back to that church. I'm like, okay, trying to listen to him. I asked him to help me find a church. And so I went to that church and I walked in and I walked into the office and I said, I honestly don't know what I'm doing here. There was a man standing there. I said, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Wow.
And he said, well, hi, I'm Jim. Tell me a little bit about you. And so I did. And he smiled and he said, I wasn't even supposed to be in today, but I would like to loan you this book. And so he loaned me a book. He loaned me Surprised by Truth by Patrick Madrid. And I took that book home. And it was summer. My kids at this point were gone to their fathers for a good chunk of the summer. So it really was kind of me on my own while my husband was working and I was doing some other things. And I laid down on the couch with Surprised by Truth and I read it cover to cover, I think in one day, and went, whoa, whoa, wow. Just so surprised and interested in these conversion stories. So interested. And it came to be kind of an insatiable type of thing. And so the journey home became a regular part of my week, right? Watching these conversion stories and going, okay, I'm getting some of this, I'm understanding, I see these things, right? But there were some holdouts. And the biggest holdout for me was the role of Mary in the church and what her role was supposed to be. Because
And of course you have the assumption that you pray.
I do.
Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
do. I do. You remember, yes. Because that was one of the ways that they pulled me out of the church when I was a senior, was when they asked me about Mary's role.
Wow.
And they said, why do you worship Mary? And I said, well, we don't worship Mary, but I honestly couldn't explain further than that. I knew we didn't worship her. I knew we didn't think she was like a goddess or anything like that, but I didn't have the knowledge or words to say what she is, what she was, you know. So all this time as a Protestant, she hasn't really been part of my life, as at least not that I was aware of. And I thought, Lord, I need clarification. I mean, I need to figure this part out. I can't say yes to you. I can't know it's your will for me to go back to the church if I still don't understand Mary. I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so I was driving home alone from Pocatello. I was going to do a master's program in nursing, and driving home alone one night in the fall, and this giant full moon was just off ahead of me. And I had been thinking about all this stuff. All this stuff's in my head, all these surprised by truth 1 and 2 and EWTN and my lists, and there's the moon. And I immediately thought of Revelations 12:1 and the woman that was clothed with the sun, who had on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was standing on the moon. And I had to pull the car over. I was on the interstate. I had to just pull the car over. And I was just absolutely overwhelmed. And I said, okay, I get it. I get it. I know who she is. It's just going to make me a little, but I just he's just like, this is who she is, So it was just so amazing. And that's when I decided, okay, I need to figure out how to go back to the church.
Yeah.
Um, so and things got kind of complicated there for a little while because I was divorced.
Sure.
We ended up getting a civil marriage before I had figured these things out, but also that was such a beautiful time. The other thing I had done was I went to a mass for the very first time in a very long time. I think I'd gone to a few Christmas Eve masses, with midnight masses with my parents over the years. But I went on my own, and I just sat in the back. I was like nervous sitting back there, like they're going to find me out. They're not even going to, they're going to tell I'm not Catholic or something back here, right? I don't belong here, kind of a thing. I literally sat in the last row and just watched what they were doing because it had been so long. And eventually I got up the courage to call the priest and ask him about coming back into the faith. And he gave us some guidance, and I found they had a returning Catholics program, which was absolutely, absolutely instrumental in helping us to make those decisions.
So it had been how many years since the reconciliation issue?
Oh, it had been about 12
Wow.
years.
Wow.
Mhm.
But that's so real.
12 years of searching.
There are people that have some type of offense, and we're talking decades later, and that moment not only represents the Catholic Church, but in some cases, it represents all of Christianity, and in some cases, all of religion, and in some cases, all of faith. And from that one person that hurt them. And your story is, and I know we're not done, but that part of the story is just so crucial to talk about, to pray for people that are, whether it's an eye roll or an off comment, or they didn't show up when they said they were going to show up, especially if it has to if it relates in any way to last rites. I've heard if there's any issue, even with whether it's clergy or laity, that can just sour a relationship so quickly. Anyway, I digress. So once you were back there, what was that process of getting fully established in the church?
It was such an interesting year. We ended up, like I said, we had a civil marriage, and then I had to begin the process of seeking an annulment. I don't think it was, I'm not sure it was considered an annulment or not, because when it was a decree of nullity. It was basically I didn't get married in the church the first time, and married an LDS, right, and a non-Catholic.
Yeah.
So it was, I think, something like a decree of lack of form or some kind of something that said, yeah, you weren't in a valid marriage. But I also investigated that stuff very carefully because I was like, what am I doing with my two children? Am I like, am I, making them illegitimate, right? I mean, I had serious questions about what does that mean if I do this in the church, and for my children, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Um, but the diocese was wonderful about answering my questions and helping me be comfortable with it. My ex-husband was helpful. He wasn't, he was supportive as much as he could be.
Sure.
Um, and so it all went okay. And my children were enrolled in religious education at that church. And my husband and I were going to returning Catholics, and we became parishioners at that church. And my daughter was baptized there. So it was beautiful. We rapidly realized we were expecting number three, and the house was too small because when I came to Idaho, I moved into his home, and that was his bachelor pad. So, like, we're getting really squeezed now. So we ended up having to move out to a different area and go to a different church. So, but it was a good thing because yes, it was a different parish, but the mass was the same,
Hmm.
right? The mass, you're comfortable with the mass and you understand it. But even during that time, everything hadn't been put in place yet. And so we weren't able to receive the Eucharist until we could get our marriage validated,
Yeah.
our marriage blessed. And so that was a very interesting time. So coming back to the church, but not being able to receive the sacraments at that time.
How long did that
And
period
it was a
last?
good thing. It was a good thing. Yeah. Um, let's see. We ended up, that was probably about 8 to 9 months.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, because it takes a while, right, to get everything. And then we ended up having our son. So I had to get well from that. And then we ended up on All Souls Day of all days. So we just passed our blessing anniversary just last week. So that was when we were in full communion with the church, and it
How
was
many?
just the start of something beautiful.
That's beautiful. How many years ago was that? The All Souls, um,
That was 2002.
2002. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
so
did
that.
say 21 years. You did.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is you're talking about, you didn't have to worry about all the statements of faith, so to speak, all the variance that disappears, and you have the creed. And you have the creed,
Mm-hmm.
creed, the creed, and the creed. And that is
Yes.
amazing. May have a different homily, but you have the creed. You have the
Yes.
liturgy of the Eucharist and
Yes.
liturgy of the Word. And yeah, I feel that more than you know. So it's really cool. Okay. So, um, what else what else can you say? I mean, here you that's a fantastic story, first of all. I so appreciate it. Maybe you can speak to, I guess it's kind of where we began. You end up back in the church. It's this beautiful experience, and over the past few decades, um, I'm assuming, based on what you've said, you've developed this incredible prayer habit. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe you could speak to your involvement in, I guess, parish life, or the importance of having that, being part of the body of Christ and having
Yeah.
a community and having for once
Mm-hmm.
this pillar in the ground.
Yeah. Um, a few key things happened after we were received into the church. Um, and had our marriage blessed, and we could receive sacraments and feel like true parishioners again, right? Um, I started to teach religious education. My older child, who was 8 or 9 at this time, went through RCIC, and so he was baptized, and the baby, of course, he was baptized like right away. I was like, Catholic mom, I'm like, we're getting this baby baptized. He was like 2 weeks old or something, a month or something like that. Um, so he was okay. He was good to go. But yeah, I started teaching religious education, and also I have been a faith community nurse for about almost 20 years now, 19 or 20 years. And that was something I found as an option at our current parish. It's the same one we've been at all this time. And I've been volunteering as a faith community nurse ever since.
Beautiful.
And so that's been a wonderful experience to be able to take your profession and combine it with your faith. It's quite a gift.
That's great.
So that was, how I've been involved in parish life. Um, in 2005, I had never been confirmed. That
Oh,
was another crazy thing that happened with all the moving that my parents did. Just like my mother wasn't able to finish her RCIA, my confirmation was supposed to be 8th to 9th grade, and we moved right between 8th and 9th grade. And so I never got confirmed as a child, as a teenager. So I wasn't confirmed. And it was 2005 when the bishop at the time had given a dispensation for Catholics, um, to adult Catholics, to attend some classes, and they could be confirmed at their parish, provided everything, all the things were met and all that. And
yeah.
I really wanted to do that. And so the I was confirmed on August 15th of 2005.
I know August 15th.
Yes, I'm sure you do. And it
Unbelievable.
happens to be the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And the reading was from Revelation 12:1 that day. And I was 9 months pregnant with number 4. And the priest joked about, I don't know if this, is he getting confirmed? I don't know how that works with if you're pregnant and you're confirmed. He was teasing, of course, but um, it just, as soon as they read Revelations 12:1, I just felt like there was just this, like, it was just such a beautiful kind of, not a closed book, but just like, okay, this chapter has, a beautiful completion. It came around to that experience. Mary brought me back into the church because she was my last holdout. And, that was the day that I was fully confirmed into the church and received the fullness of the Holy Spirit. And look, that's what she did at Pentecost too. She was right there among that early church, standing with them when they received the fullness of the Holy Spirit too. So yeah, so she became much more my mom, my mother.
Wow.
Yeah. And several years later that, well, I went to uh, play group, right, and met some wonderful, wonderful Catholic mom friends who are still my friends to this day. And we, from the play group, decided we moms really needed something for ourselves, for our spiritual benefit, and also for our sanity. We had all these kids, right? And so we started Lifted, which I don't know if you've heard about that.
Mm-mm.
It's not going anymore, but it was Ladies in Faith Together, Idaho. It actually was quite a big movement in the mid 2000s, late 2000s. And just it really helped me grow as a Christian. And I learned about St. Therese of Lisieux. And I learned, I just absolutely loved her. We would read books and talk about them. You know, we would do like a book club kind of thing. I just fell in love with Saint Therese, and I also felt a connection to Saint Teresa of Avila. And so my next chapters were about becoming a Carmelite and how God used, you know, God used these different experiences and different people to lead me into the Carmelite. You know what I'm saying? The
Yeah.
Carmelite, not the Carmelite faith, but the Carmelite way of
Yep.
life. So
Yep.
the
Wow.
order, Carmelite order. There we go. I'm like, oh, lose my
Yeah.
words.
Why? Yeah, exactly. I was having
Like,
trouble.
where's that word?
Yeah. Where is that? Okay. So all that said, Gina, what would you say to anyone? I always say, like, someone that was in your shoes at the age of 20 or 30, what would you say to those that are listening?
Keep searching for truth. Um, keep searching for God and searching for truth. And they're going to come because He is truth and He is love. They're going to come together. So if you have both of those as your earnest desire, you're going to find Him. You're going to find Him and you're going to find where He wants you to be. Um, and sometimes if things don't sound right, get clarification. Don't just accept something. There were many times when I was a Protestant when something just didn't sound right. And I would kind of go, well, it doesn't sound right. And then I'd kind of just go off, you know, or somebody would say something disparaging about the Catholic Church or some other denomination. Well, that didn't sound right. God is love, right?
Mhm.
Um, or just things like that that would, you know, or my great aunt who was the most holy woman I ever knew. She was like a little Mother Teresa in my eyes. And she was Catholic. I'm like, well, she's Catholic and she's clearly a Christian, right? I mean, I have no doubts. This woman's Bible is worn out, right? Um, so just keep searching and yeah, just keep searching and looking for God and trusting that He's not going to lead you astray. And everybody's faith journey is a little bit different. That's why there's all these stories. So just don't give up.
That's well said, Gina. Thank you so much again for the vulnerability, the willingness to kind of share the totality of the journey. I know that people will be impacted. This is one of my favorites for sure. Not just because it parallels my story, but there's so much in there that we can learn from. So thank you. And for everyone that watches this, thank you so much. And until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.